Invisible Soldiers podcast.
Welcome to the Invisible Soldiers podcast. I'm Rebecca.
I'm Corey.
And we're the host of one of the fastest growing podcasts in advertising. This week, we welcome a dynamic woman whose career in advertising spans over 40 years. She's worked in agencies, started her own strategic and marketing research firm, and she's even authored multiple books, including her latest, Let Me Explain Black Again. Please welcome to the pod, Pepper Miller.
Woo! Thank you, Pepper. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
We're extremely excited to have you. So your career is career goals for most of us, being able to work your way through the agency life into entrepreneurship and ownership. So it's a lot of ground we want to cover with you. But you have an interesting story. You were born in Chicago during a time when millions of Black people were exiting the Jim Crow South, and your family actually made the reverse trek. Can you talk about that journey, what you saw and how it affected you?
Yes. So I was about 6 or 7. My mother is a school teacher. My father was an auditor for the government and was a trained classical pianist. So he had an undergrad in piano and a graduate degree in music theory. And so he was offered a professorship at Albany State College. It's Albany State University now in Albany, Georgia. And so we moved there during segregation, and it was quite the culture shock. You know, we were colored back then. So to see whites only, colored not allowed, I mean, it was everywhere. These signs were everywhere. But the Black community, we lived together. That was one of the good things about segregation, is that we lived together. The doctor lived a couple of streets over. The pastor of a new Black church lived next door. The military family lived on the other side. Mrs. Ponder was the cleaning woman. So it was very good. And we had businesses in our community and we supported the businesses. But it was tough. Public places like, banks or libraries, if we were even allowed to go to libraries or the bus stations where, we had to be together, there still was the Black side, the Black water fountain, the white water fountain, the Black washroom, the white washroom. And those facilities were always filthy and substandard because the administrators in these facilities did not clean them, but we got blamed for that. That was another thing we got this less than halo for. But it changed me when the Lieutenant Governor was Lester Maddox then, and he referenced Black people as niggas, and it was on the 9 o'clock news. And so I knew he was somebody important, but I cannot tell you, and it still stings. It still stings. And our parents had to talk to us about that and assure us that Black people were wonderfully made and that we were fine as we are. And so that's when I discovered I was Black. The Klan was burning crosses. We lived across the street from this big field we call the Ponderosa, and we could see them burning the crosses out of our living room window. My mother was marching for civil rights. My parents, educated parents, could not vote. And I just think about that. But it left this indelible mark on my heart. It changed me.
In that world, at that time, there was advertising. Do you remember what was like the first ad that caught your eye or stood out to you? And were Black people represented? Were they misrepresented or were they unrepresented in that moment?
There were no Black people in ads. There was Ebony magazine and there was Jet. Those were always on everybody's cocktail table and everybody Black. Mr. Johnson had hair care products, I think, and he advertised hair care products in them. Maybe they had a relationship with Procter and Gamble back then when they were doing some ads. But the first ad I remember was the Brick Girl ad. She was on television too, and she was very fair, blonde and blue-eyed. And this was the most beautiful person in the world. And so, I didn't think about it, but how I didn't look like that. And, colorism was strong then. The light-skinned Black people were treated better and revered as beautiful, even up through high school.
It's really interesting about how your parents kept you in a positive frame in terms of self-awareness and self-knowledge that I assume pushed you to reach some goals. So, kind of thinking about your career, where did you go to college and what kind of educational path got you to have this kind of knowledge and insight that would fuel your career?
I have a raggedy college educational past. I never finished. I'm one of those people that never finished. I went to Spelman for a year. I was a business major. I went to Lindblom High School Tech, and I was very good in math. Lindblom was a great high school, for like 4 years of English college, and I AP math. I was good at math, and I wanted to be an accountant. So I went to Spelman for a year. I have to tell you guys a story about that, and left after a year and went to DePaul because I wanted to be a CPA. But I was working and trying to go to school at night, but I was rocking and rolling. I was even in 4As and going to DePaul and working and doing all this stuff.
How did you find the 4As?
They had the 4As at J. Walter Thompson. I wanted to work in the advertising area of the company and not the service area. And they suggested I go to 4A. So the company paid for me to go to do that, which was wonderful.
I love that because those are some of the things that Corey and I talk about for young people and taking, the reins of their career to ask for more. But it takes, I think, a lot of bravery, especially in spaces where you might be the only Black person to advocate for yourself. Can you talk a little bit about, coming from a Jim Crow South and all the things that you saw? What was it like to bring that into your career every day?
J. Walter was a fun place to work, and we thought we were part of the family. There were 600 people there. There were only 10 professional Black people, and the rest were clerical. They definitely had some racial issues there. We would see each other in the hall. We had the benefit of having our first Black, at that time, he was called a director of personnel, not HR. He started having luncheons for the professional people in the executive conference room so that we can know each other better and stop and just not waving our hands at each other. And that was one of the most important things that happened there. So we became cohesive and we would see each other in the hall and talk. And whites would ask, my boss was like, I saw you talking to Ray Lyle. I saw you talking to so-and-so. What's going on? I mean, we were paranoid. I was like, we're just talking. I mean, they thought it was some conspiracy happening. It was difficult to get promoted. We were scrutinized a lot harder than other people. And when Harold Washington won the primary, that's when, you started seeing the real people because it was an ad agency. It was a buzz all the time. People in the hall, creative people on skateboards. The next day after he won, you could hear a pin drop on the carpet. We could not show our delight. We were hiding in closets and under stairwells, hugging each other. We couldn't do it publicly. You would think that it was someplace in 1928 or something.
No, I think all three of us have been there. That kind of thing drove me from certain spaces myself. So I understand what you're talking about. One of the things you talked about, part of defining Blackness is disproving stereotypes. Can you talk about that? Because in those spaces, I definitely know, just in like a simple luncheon situation, I would avoid eating chicken, I wouldn't eat
Yes.
watermelon, like
Right.
I
Oh
was very
my God.
nervous about being late
Talk
because
about it.
I always felt like I had the burden of the entire race on my back, right? And I think a lot of us deal with that where we have to disprove stereotypes in order to eventually define what our Blackness is.
We have to understand that when Black people were dragged here, ever since we were dragged here, we've had this cloud, I was talking to Rebecca about it, of less than. And it's still there. I don't care if you're Oprah. Remember what happened to Oprah when she wanted to buy this expensive purse in Europe and they wouldn't let her?
Yes.
I don't care who you are. Ken Chenault, who was the CEO of American Express for 17 years, was at a CEO conference for all CEOs, and everybody had on polo shirts and khakis. And there was another white guy there, and he came up to Ken and he said, "Man, you and I didn't get the memo." Ken said, "I got the memo. I can't dress like that because people will start giving me their car keys for me to park their car, check their bags. I always have to wear a suit to these things, always." So a big part of the multicultural experience, Black, Asian, Hispanic, and LGBT, is countering negative stereotypes. I shouldn't say negative stereotypes because I guess a stereotype is negative, but countering stereotypes. It's a big part of our culture. And that's one of the nucleus that drives us is countering that. And it goes across all socioeconomic levels. So Black women tend to over tip sometimes, or they make sure that
Yes.
they're tipping well. I don't care if the meal was $400, 20%, that's going to be $80. And we're glad to give it because we always want to like break these stereotypes. So, and that's something that's a part of our culture that people don't understand. And from a marketing and advertising standpoint, that's why we scrutinize advertising a lot closer. We are looking for, hoping that there aren't any stereotypes. We're looking for positive realism. And I don't want to get too ahead of that. We may not say that, but we're looking that positive realism is really how we live and the goodness of Black people and how we live and what's in our hearts and our hope. So we're looking for that in advertising, and we tend to scrutinize things a lot more. That's why it's important to understand what stereotyping does and how we behave from that. Everything ladders back up to our history. Everything, all of our beliefs and behavior ladders back up to that. Everything that we do, particularly for US born Black people, ladders back up to that. So that's why we have to understand this history and what happens. And stereotyping is ongoing because the cloud of less than is still there. It has not gone away, and we're constantly fighting against it.
You bring up a really good point in terms of less than as well as history. We were kind of chatting about it in the green room, just really about the erasure of our history. And so, in order to understand, as you said, there has to be some history there. And in the space of strategy and research, can you talk to us? We've got some listeners who may not fully understand strategy and research, but can you also give us, with the lens of how it relates to Black consumers as well as Black marketers?
Yes, Rebecca, strategy and research is so important. Getting that right with the Black community is absolutely critical. So, as we know, strategy is creating this action plan. That was another reason why I wrote the book, Let Me Explain Black Again, for strategists who were targeting Black people. Because in order to develop the plan, they have to have some research, they have to have some data, they have to gather some data to help the clients and the creative team understand the segment. The strategists are responsible for writing the creative strategy. So they have to tell the story about the target, who they are, what they want, what they believe, what their dreams and hopes are, what their relationship is with the brand or the category, the industry that the agency is responsible for creating messaging for or about. So strategy and research is so important. When it comes to research, it's important to understand, we talk about beliefs and behavior, the why behind the beliefs and behavior. And I found that a lot of strategists were struggling in the Black agency because they often didn't have enough money or budgets to do enough research to help them tell the story. So a lot of what they did was a lot of secondary research, going to the internet, using, and the internet is not bad if you have reliable sources of wonderful articles about the target, like a New York Times or Washington Post, a Black enterprise. They typically have reliable sources and often numbers and maybe even some data points that you can use to help tell your story. I didn't have that when I was coming along. So you have to make the case. Research helps you make the case for why this target, what they believe in, why they believe in it. Research does that. And then you take the why and develop the action plan or the strategy. So it's very, very, very important. And one of the drawbacks of research is that the research industry is just notorious for not investing in Black research. I mean, you look at these research companies, we're not there. The research that's being done, we're not there, or we're sprinkled in with mainstream because we speak English. They speak English, don't they? So, we're doing some qual research, exploratory research, so we can understand, who these people are. Qualitative helps you understand the why. Quantitative is about measuring. So, my work was mostly in qualitative, which I love to understand the why. But a lot of brands, when they would do qualitative research, they just rolled us in with mainstream people. And while Black people tell the truth, they don't always tell the whole truth, if we're not with each other. And then if we are with each other, it's still suspect. What is this about? How come it's just Black people in here? And I had to start telling them in the beginning. I think the introduction in the focus group is one of the most important segments of the focus group discussion with Black people, because you have to tell them why they're there and invite them to be Black and invite them to bring their whole selves to the table. So what I do is, how many people have been in a focus group before? Hands go up. How many people have been in an all Black group before, whether it's virtual or in person? No hands go up in 2023 America, guys. No hands go up. Maybe one. And I've been doing that for 20 plus years. And I would do a lot of focus groups in 20 years. And I have to talk to clients and tell them we have to have, not a lot, but just, we need to have some time to help them feel comfortable. Hey, we're at Thanksgiving dinner and everybody's at the table, the formal dining room table. We're eating, we're talking, we're having fun. And then, a lot of us go in the kitchen and we have dessert. And what are we having? And people like peach cobbler, and sweet potato pie, pound cake. Yeah, yeah. And we're sitting in the back talking and having some real talk. And I tell the respondents, I want that conversation. And they understand. But it takes, it just maybe like 4 more minutes. But you got to have time to do that. And I think it's important not only with Black people, but you have to do it with Asians and Hispanic. Each one of them are still trying to fit in with mainstream, and they want to please the moderator and please people, don't want to say negative things about the creative. So you have to invite them to tell their truth. If you don't like it, tell me. It's okay. You still gonna get your money at the end. And so the research industry, because it's not been inclusive, we've been on the outskirts, and I just don't think they don't do a good job with Black and other ethnic consumers because we're not there. We're not part of the team. They don't do designated research a lot with these segments. The qualifications or how they do research is based on mainstream standards, which are not relevant today.
So in that thought, have you heard of this idea that some of these general market agencies have been calling themselves transcultural? I question that because if you're telling me that in the research industry, if you're a general market agency, you're not looping in or investing in research about this particular market, how could it possibly meet the need or meet that segment?
And if you want to say you're transcultural, that you have expertise, you cannot keep combining the segments together. We speak English, and English has become the cultural identifier. So if you speak a different language, they recognize a different culture. For Black people, we just gonna roll them in with mainstream. And they don't recognize our culture as different. We are taught to not talk about differences. It makes people uncomfortable. People say it's rude. And then in this climate, they say it's divisive. But it is divisive to not talk about differences. Different does not mean deficient. It's an opportunity. It's a huge opportunity. And it's a lot of work, but it can pay off so wonderfully. You can change yourself by trying to understand people who are different from you. It doesn't mean my hair is kinky, my lips are full, my nose is round, my skin is brown, my hair is kinky, and it does not mean that none of those are deficient. There's beauty in all of that. And we're still bumping up against the mainstream standards.
Wow, that's a mouthful. I'd love to transition to your book, Let Me Explain Black Again. Summer of 2020, which, I think will always be remembered as the summer of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. That felt like a test for a lot of brands. And it was a test to stand for something, take action, show empathy, even show receipts regarding diversity. The brands who had been in the space a long time seemed to pass the test. But for the brands who hadn't, it felt like a pop quiz. Why were so many of them caught off guard, especially around the passion point of Black lives?
They felt some empathy there with Black Lives Matter, but it was in the back of their mind, all lives matter. I didn't do it. I didn't have anything to do for me. People that have that kind of mindset don't realize that they're culpable too of what's happening to Black people. And it was a number of things. Again, it was you got Corey and Barack Obama and McGee and Faye and we've got LeBron James and Beyonce. What they didn't recognize is that some people made it through the funnel. When it comes to opportunity, Black people's path to the opportunity is a funnel, in my opinion, versus white people who have like a 4-lane highway. And I'm not saying people don't have challenges with either, but we still have this funnel. And there's some people who made it through the funnel of how white people define success, the LeBrons, the Oprahs, or just seeing people like Corey, creative director and ad agency, people report to you. So it was that, and we don't need to invest. And it was we speak English, and it's ignorance, and sometimes maybe a little racism. Maybe people don't realize. And so, Time Magazine called their awareness that there was a problem with race in America still, even though we've progressed in civil rights, as an overdue awakening. So I was extremely busy during that time. My phone was jumping off the hook. People that wanted to talk to me, people that were embarrassed, people that wanted to do research. And what I saw was there were a number of brands that had a substantial Black audience or customers that had never done research, but they wanted to understand them. I mean, you wouldn't believe. It goes back to the English. They speak English, so we don't need to do anything special for them. So it wasn't a big awakening for them. We saw, Corey, and you do research, that a number of brands have pledged X amount of millions of dollars over 5 or 10 years to Black colleges and universities, or to invest more in marketing and advertising. I think Procter & Gamble, Mark Pritchard, who has been an advocate for Black value and Black inclusion now, has pledged to invest over a number of years, I think it's $80 million, to Black owned and operated media. Procter & Gamble had a relationship with Black people for a long time, and then they believed in the total market, one message to reach everybody. They took business from people, from agencies, and gave it to mainstream. And I think they lost a lot of households. A lot of brands did. And so I think Mark had an aha moment before George Floyd. He had an aha moment and started creating these wonderful videos through the Widen the Screen initiative that they have. But there are a number of reasons why people didn't invest in Black or didn't see us. We've been invisible for so long until George Floyd. I can't tell you every day I think about George Floyd and I say, God bless him. Because as Time Magazine calls it, America has had an overdue awakening. They have. I'm not sure what's happening now. They have had this awakening, and it doesn't go away. I think it has been imprinted on many people. What they do with it is something else. But now they know, and they do know better.
And I think it requires, to be honest, more books to be written about it so that they don't forget. And I think that came out of 2020, what we saw, and I think what we feel now is the failures in leadership. Leadership's blind spots are a consistent topic in your book. You don't just talk about them broadly, you define them and define many different types of blind spots. Can you talk about the defining ones?
There's 7 of them. We probably don't have time to do them. So out quickly, the avoidance of America's unbridled history, privilege, and the deficit of empathy, misunderstanding the language of Black culture, misunderstanding and misjudging Black identity, being unapologetically Black, the fact that we're not post-racial, and generations of awakening that give fight for equality. And so the blind spots that I talk about a lot, because we can't go through them, is, the first one, as I mentioned, how important that is to talk about our history. America prides itself on therapy, psychoanalysis, and therapy. We now have therapists online. You could go online and get a therapist if you're feeling some kind of way. America prides itself on that. And as you know, with therapy and psychoanalysis, it's important to go back and look at your history to understand what happened so that you can better understand where the person, the client, the patient is today. That is acceptable, except when it comes to Black people. So important that we have to do that. So I mentioned that is the number one blind spot. If I tell clients, if you don't get anything else, you've got to get this, because everything ladders back up, like respect and badge value and Kairos time and smoldering coals. There's a lot of characteristics that I talk about that we don't have time to get into that are linked back to that. And then the second one that I talk about a lot is the misunderstanding of language in Black culture. Again, I mentioned that before. Yes, I speak English, but are you talking to me? I've had a client or a couple that have said they speak English, don't they? Which is a rhetorical question. But it was really a rationale for not investing in Black people. And my response was, yes, I speak English, but are you talking to me? Are your messages relevant? Are they relatable? Do they have positive realism? And are they authentic? I know we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the third one that I would talk about is misunderstanding Black identity. We talk about how we're not a monolith. So there's this growth of Black biracials or biracial people. Maybe they're Black and, or maybe they're Asian and something, but a lot of them identify as Black and they want to celebrate both sides of their culture. So that's one thing. The other thing is, just not understanding how important our identity is for us and to us, and what it means to us, and how there are these, again, mainstream standards, but we still want to be, and I love the young people who are unapologetic. They're less and less caring about what society says about us. The number one question I get asked all the time is, how do Black people want to be referenced? Black, African American, people of color, or BIPOC. And Black people, as well as our mainstream clients, make the mistake of interchanging Black with people of color. Black is the preference. Studies show that all the time. We've got Black immigrants. While all African Americans are Black by race, not all Black people are African American. So we have these Black immigrants who want to hold on to their culture from their motherland and not want to be identified as African American. So Black tends to be the preference. But what we do in marketing is we interchange Black with people of color. If you're talking about Black people, it's particularly, I see this with my white colleagues and clients. If they're talking about Black people, they feel more comfortable saying people of color. People of color represents the collective group of Black, African American, Asian, and Native American people. If you are working on projects for Black people, then say Black people. Just say that. Don't interchange. When you interchange Black and people of color and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, there to me is a homogenization of our culture. My experience is different from an Asian. So how are you lumping us all together? And, when you're really talking about Black people. So that's one of the things we have to push forward, when they're coming to you for a Black project to reach Black people and they got people of color written all in the proposal. Just you doing this for Black people. Is this Hispanic and Asian coming in here? No, then just say that. People have to be uncomfortable. And so those are the three things that I talk about a lot, the importance of the history and importance of understanding our language and misunderstanding our identity, which is very important.
So, Pepper, we have one last question. I'd love to get your thoughts about hip hop and advertising because one of the things I've learned is that a lot of brands that haven't put in the work, the time, the research to understand the Black consumer, a lot of times hip hop becomes this low hanging fruit or this easy portal of entry into the Black space without fully understanding it. So I really like to hear what are your thoughts on that hip hop as like this shortcut into the Black space?
So millennials have grown and surpassed the boomers. They are now the largest segment of the population, millennials in general. And we know that white millennials and young people love hip hop as well. I was looking at a TikTok video the other day. I can't even remember I think this girl was a country music person and now she's doing hip hop. Yo, my brother, she's doing that. This white blonde girl. I think using hip hop for targeting youth is important, but I think research needs to be attached with that. And I think you still have to still consider that, APR. Is it authentic? Is it authentic? Is it positive? And not all hip hop is necessarily positive, even though people may like the beat and stuff, but it's the misogynist hip hop is, wrong. But you still need to follow the same formula of doing research to understand the target. You can't just skip stuff. They skip so many steps when it comes to us. You can't skip the steps and go to hip hop. You still need to understand this target. And is hip hop the right way to go? In some cases, it is not. Actually, in many cases, it is not. It's showing us in positive situations that break the stereotypes. That's the power. I mean, I'm not saying not to use hip hop. That's where the power is. I am still showing, I kind of stopped and I've been asking, but for years and years, I was showing that Tide with Downy commercial that Burrell did. And then I've been showing the Walmart mainstream commercial and I would show the Black Walmart commercial so people can see there is so much more value in showing us as positive contributors to society. So hip hop isn't bad. I still think research needs to be done before that. I think jumping on the bandwagon with hip hop is the easy way out. I think sometimes you are excluding a lot of people. It can be not be perceived as authentic, even though you've got these messages that might be coming from hip hop, but it's not always authentic. And particularly if the brand has never had any type of engagement with the Black consumer audience. So you've never had any engagement and you're going to come out with a hip hop ad. That's bad news bees, bad news bears. It is. It doesn't work. And the Black audience knows that and they could see that. So the first thing is like, how do we be authentic to this audience, this broader audience? And how do we get feedback to understand who they are and what they want? And if we want to use a hip hop direction, it has to be, I think, very targeted and it still has to reflect authentic, positive realism and representation. What happens is a lot of brands focus solely on the representation. So we'll do hip hop as representation. We'll swap out the white actors for the Black actors, so we'll have representation. But what they miss is the realism, the positive realism, and the authenticity. And using hip hop without having a relationship and without really under the segment is only about representation, and it doesn't have these other elements in there. So brands need to really think or rethink their approach with this audience. Authentic, positive realism, and representation, all of those and things that are relevant, that's the way to go. Can we check the box on all of those things before we even consider hip hop?
Pepper, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. We really appreciate your time. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this episode, so I appreciate you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
And thanks to all our listeners out there who continue to support the pod. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Invisible Soldiers podcast. Continue to follow us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you. See you next time. Peace.